Good afternoon. My name is Susan Doyle from Box Media, and I will be your facilitator today. I would like to welcome you to Lean Construction Ireland's 23rd webinar, the topic of which is ISO 18404, a model for lean transformation in the construction sector, presented by Steve Ward and Simon Cackles. If you have a question, please type it in the question box, and we will consolidate and ask Steve and Simon in the second half of the webinar. If there are any questions that we don't get answered during the webinar, we will follow up by email afterwards. This webinar has been brought to you by Lean Construction Ireland in conjunction with Box Media, their media and communications partner. The speakers for today are Steve Ward from WSP Continuous Improvement Services and Simon Cackles from Gilbert and Good. Steve has a lifetime of construction experience going from apprentice carpenter to chartered builder. He helped pioneer the adoption of lean construction in the UK and has worked full-time in this specialist field since 2002. Achieving a doctorate in civil engineering in 2016, his research examines critical success factors for the practical application of lean thinking within the construction sector. Now helping lead WSP's continuous improvement team, Steve is focused on helping organisations achieve lean transformations using ISO 18404. Simon is a chartered construction manager with over 30 years experience in the construction industry, managing major capital investment portfolios, programs and projects, as well as leading the strategic development and operations of construction businesses. Simon is currently the Managing Director of Gilbert and Good Limited, who are undergoing lean transformational change in order to improve the productivity, performance and profitability of the business, which should also see it being the first construction sector company worldwide to attain the new ISO 18404 standard in Lean and Six Sigma. As a former head of projects for BAA, Simon has been at the forefront of industry innovation and best practice. Simon is also a non-executive director of the CIOS Local Enterprise Partnership, leading the construction and house building sector strategy. I will now pass you over to Steve and Simon to start their presentation.
Thank you, Susan, and good afternoon, everybody. Glad you could join us, and thanks for this opportunity for sharing our story. This is very much about the subject of lean construction intervention versus transformation. So that's the main topic of it. We've already done the introductions, thank you, Susan, so I'm just going to skip this slide. So, considering then what we mean by a lean intervention, so the act of intervening, and basically this is what we mainly see so far worldwide in lean. It's ad hoc deployment of lean techniques based on waste removal. So I'm going to assume, and forgive me any lean experts that are listening in, I'm going to assume that we have a few novices and just provide a simple example of what I mean by a lean intervention. So what I call the meat and two veg, the starting point of lean, is based on what you see as an individual. So when you look out at a construction site or look into a busy office, and you can see I've been doing this a while because of the CRT screens there, a little bit old, need an update there, but never mind. It's really based on what do you see. Now, most people see work and busy people, and that's okay. But when we put our lean lens on, what we really see, the only thing we see is activity. It's just activity. And within the activity, we recognize that there's some work, which is stuff you can get paid for, and there will also exist some waste. So that's the starting point. Now, once we break that down into two, we can split it a bit further by saying there are three elements in that day. If something actually changes to get the product or service closer to what the customer actually wants and is prepared to pay for, we could class that as a value-adding activity. Here we can see a couple of guys reading a drawing, and it might be absolutely essential to read the drawing for the work to continue, but nothing actually changed in the process. So we can define support activity as something we have to do currently, but it does not in itself add value. And very simply, if you look at a process and you can't see any activity that falls into one of these two categories, then it must be the third category, which is waste. And there are many kinds of waste, and I'm not going to go that far into this presentation because that's not the core subject in hand. So how might we use this philosophy in an intervention? So here, if you did a day in the life exercise, a day in the life of a designer, an architect, an electrician, carpenter, we could take the working day as the available capacity. And if we were actually able to observe the day and add up and create a sum of the amount of time we spend doing each of these three things, you'd now all be consultants, okay? And you've just created what we know as a value stream analysis, and it'd look a bit like this. Now, why is this important? Well, with lean, we want to not worry too much about the value adding bit, the smallest part. Let's leave that alone. But what we can do, we can minimize the support activity. So how might we make it easier to read the drawing? If we've got lots of support activities on site to do, like, for example, measuring and marking, we might make templates rather than continue to measure and mark. And the waste actually don't need at all. And if you do this successfully, you've achieved what basic lean sets out to achieve, which is the creation of capacity to do more. And if you successfully do that, you can see we can now do twice as much work with the same resource. So let's look at a very simple one-page case study of where this has been applied. So this was a university building. It was actually in Swansea, and a friend of mine I taught collaborative planning to did a workshop with the supply chain, agreed a fast-track program. But during the works, he found out that the installation of the concrete panels was just not hitting it. They weren't going on fast enough, and asked me to go to site and help out. So I went to site, met the subcontractor, who of course welcomed me with open arms, as they would, and told me then, I've got these guys that have been doing this 25 years, and of course there's nothing you're going to be able to tell them. We're experts, and what the hell do you know about concrete panels anyway? So I said, well, I don't know that much, but I know how to look at a process, and I convinced them to work with me to look at this process. And what actually happened was when we said, go, I want you to go and fit a panel, the first thing that happened was they walked 100 meters to go and get a drawing from the site office, which is obviously waste, came back with the drawing, spent a few minutes looking for which kind of bracket they needed off the drawing, so we've got a bit of support activity. Then they walked 50 meters in the other direction to where all the brackets were strewn all over the floor, done up in white cloth bags. They then spent 20 minutes looking for brackets. They found the right brackets, came back to the panel, and when the first bolt started to turn, bolting that bracket on the panel was the first time we have any value. Okay. So for any lean novices, this is what we mean by lean intervention, by applying this basic concept of value and waste and understanding waste. Now, it was very, very easy to double productivity just using this very basic approach. So there's lots of this kind of ad hoc deployment going on, and it can be very successful. I'm not knocking it, but this presentation is about something different. It's about lean transformation. What do we mean by that? Well, it's systems wide, it's continuous, it's based on lean thinking, and it will benefit customers, the business and employees in the long term. So a couple of examples of that. This was a slide produced by a project manager from H&M clothing store. So they're the biggest clothing retailer worldwide. And they worked out that they build X meters per week when they fit out clothing stores. And in 2008, 9, 10, they worked out it was pretty stable. We started applying lean thinking, mainly through collaborative planning with the supply chain, so using the last plan system in 2010, and by 2011 we got a step change improvement. That continued in 2012, and we took the average lead time from an average of 11 weeks down to an average of 4 weeks. And this was across a supply chain with 3 different main contractors. So I'm putting that in the transformational box because it was long term and it involved the whole supply chain. Here's another one. This is local authority roads maintenance. And the graph you're looking at is a technique called SPC, statistical process control, and it is tracking profit. So it's showing that there's been a jump, a system change in profit. It's gone from -2% to +20%. And this was measuring streetlight tracking. So streetlight tracking is a process where you basically dig a trench, lay a cable and reinstate. There was a problem because the customer, the council, said, we have a fixed price for this, we're not going to pay you anymore, that's what you get. And the company was going to lose the work stream because they couldn't match the cost. Now, over a 3-year period, we were carrying out lots of interventions like this. And the overall project was a thing called a KTP, a knowledge transfer partnership, which is a partnership with a university designed to deliver a project. And the project in this instance was to embed lean thinking in this organization. This is why I'm classing this as quite an important slide for other reasons. If you look at the top line here, this top line shows turnover over a period of years, 5 years. The bottom line shows profit over the same period. Now, it's a very interesting slide, I believe, because we started this in 2009 and we were doing a lot of work. And you can see the first 2 years between 2009 and 11 are fairly flat in terms of what we got out of it. It didn't really get any worse, but it just stayed the same. But from then on, away we went, okay? And you've ended up with kind of quadruple the profit margin, which is the surplus profit that was returned to the customers in the council. And there's a lot of learning points within that. But again, I'm classing that as a transformation. So on to the 18404. We didn't know how this might work. We'd heard there's some resistance, there's some critics. Some people don't like ISOs full stop. But the gut feel was it's the right thing to do. Why? Because standardization is at the heart of lean. Now we've got one we made earlier in true Blue Peter fashion, so we think we have an informed view. So ISO 18405 deals with 2 issues. One is the quality of training, 2, organizational deployment. So let's take those in turn. So the quality of training, you can go online, you can buy a 6 Sigma black belt for 50 quid, all right? It's worthless, but you get a certificate. A friend of mine, he may even be listening in, Niall, from Designer Group, he was doing quite a lot of work there, and he said to me, Steve, you've got to give us something for all the training we're doing. We need some kind of certification. I said, why is that? And he said, well, you know, our competitor, one of our competitors, has been on a lean workshop. They've been on a half-day lean workshop, and at the end, the consultant gave them all yellow belts. I said, well, I'm not going to do that, because if I give you anything, it's going to be something worth having. And at the time, there was nothing I could offer in Ireland, because I didn't have anything with global reach. So what makes this worse is the company in question start waving these things around to their clients and saying, aren't we good? We've got all these yellow belts. And that can bring the whole thing into disrepute. So any training under ISO is monitored and regulated, and you can be pretty sure you're getting something of a decent quality. In terms of organizational deployment, the ISO deals with 3 things. Strategy. There must be a clear link in terms of why you're doing lean, you know, to the business plan. You must have defined objectives. the architecture for lean needs to be in place. So how are you going to manage this as a lean system over the long term? So, for example, steering groups, a reporting structure, accountabilities. There must be a system of continuous improvement with defined metrics and review mechanisms. Now, at WSP, we have our own take on this, and we've produced this graphic which you might find helpful. And we believe if you get all these things in place, it will lead to successful continuous improvement. One other thing, we've got a lot of innovators in lean in Europe and in the States. We've got maybe we're getting into the early adopter side. We haven't got to the early majority yet in terms of getting this widespread through industry. And I found when I researched this that in order to cross this chasm, the early majority need a clear path to follow. And I believe that we've now got that because we know that this ISO fits construction and provides a clear path. So hopefully that's given you a bit of background. I'm going to pass you over now to Simon Cackley. Now, Simon's the managing director who led this personally, and I'm really sort of privileged to be able to introduce you to him. So, for my money, a leader is someone that knows the way, goes the way, and shows the way. So I'm going to pass you over to Simon right now.
Okay, thank you, Steve, and good afternoon, everybody. As they said, my name's Simon Cackley. I'm the managing director of a company called Gilbert and Good, based in Cornwall. We're a combination of a main contractor and a developer, but most of the time we build houses. We build circa 200 homes a year, do other contracting work. We're part of a group called the Ocean Housing Group that has a housing association within it. So part of what we do is build houses for our own group companies. Affordable houses, so our remit is to build those houses as efficiently as possible for our group. The other half of our business is either developing, building houses for sale, or external contracting work. And clearly the purpose of doing that is to generate as much profit as we can by reducing our costs and making as much return from those projects, which we then gift aid back to our parent company or to part of the group, to actually cross-subsidise building more affordable housing. So we have a clear mission within the business to build as efficiently as possible and to generate as much as a return to gift aid within the group. The company itself has been around for 40 years. We're looking at a turnover of around about 25 million at the moment, with a growth plan up to 40 million over the next couple of years, and we've got 70 employees within the company. In terms of the lean journey, and it kind of links both mine and the business together. As Susan said at the introduction, I previously worked as head of projects for BAA. It was around about the time Sir John Egan launched Rethinking Construction. So I guess I was in the sort of early days of the school of the university of different thinking in construction delivery, around the time that there was a sort of first generation frameworks, continuous improvement project process, which then moved into looking at things like eliminating waste in order to improve project performance. So I took some of that learning and the best bits and basically transferred some of that knowledge to Gilbert and Good when I joined the company around about 10 years ago. It was predominantly around the last planner side of things, which I rolled out on all the projects that we've got within the business. But within the business, there was a need, and I referred earlier to sort of reducing costs, increasing profitability, so basically driving efficiencies through the business through increasing productivity. I met Steve through the Constructing Excellence Network, and we were discussing opportunities in terms of how to take it further within the business in terms of lean. And we, off the back of that, we initiated some lean awareness training sessions within the team. And we actually set up a couple of pilot projects, picked 2 projects that we were delivering, took them right back early stages with collaborative planning, getting all the supply chain on board for early stage engagement, and then partnering and collaborating with that supply chain using Last Planner to improve the efficiency of delivery, which was very successful in all counts, and also working with the supply chain to improve their awareness of lean. Before I just talk a little bit more about Gilbert and Good, just picking up the wider challenge of productivity, and certainly in the UK, if you pick up any government document, whether it's industrial strategy, construction sector strategy, everybody's going on about productivity. And if you actually look at where the UK stands in the G7 in terms of productivity, I think we're about 6th out of 7th. If you then look at where construction stands in the UK, again, we're probably pretty well down the table when you look at perhaps comparators such as the manufacturing industry, which has actually significantly increased its productivity over the last 20 years. We also have a challenge in Cornwall that we've actually got 75% of the average productivity of the rest of the UK. We're also an SME, which tend to be down the what's referred to as the long tail in terms of productivity. So you can look at it one way, that we've got a huge challenge in terms of trying to improve our productivity, but also say there's a huge opportunity when you look at the amount of waste that is in construction, non-value adding work, which Steve was referring to earlier. So I saw this as an opportunity for the business to basically seize the competitive advantage and drive efficiency. But I think it's also a much wider thing within the industry. There are many ways to deal with the productivity challenge, or the productivity puzzle that people are referring to it now. Certain about that is investment in whether it's IT, technology, or R&D. But something that's very reachable and scalable is actually looking at lean systems and lean transformation within a business. So in terms of the lean journey for Gilbert and Good, as I mentioned earlier, the 2 pilot projects we did were very successful, and I was looking to see how we could roll it out wider across the company and all operations within the company. Speaking to Steve, he identified 18404 as a possible route to support this. Steve had previously spoken to Professor Tony Bendell, who was actually chaired the committee that authored the standard, and Tony offered to come down and do a gap analysis on our business, and the result of that was he thought that we were in a position where we could actually grow to actually attain the ISO standard, albeit there were several challenges that we had to overcome on the way. There was a challenge as well in terms of the cost of 18404, which may no doubt come up in one of the questions later. But we were fortunate in that we were successful in securing some funding from the CITB to actually pilot the project around the agreed set of deliverables. The funding from the CITB covered all the cost of the advice that we received, but obviously there was a significant investment in terms of our own time over and above the CITB funding. CITB, and those that have done any projects with the improvement project with the CITB will know that's all set around a number of key deliverables, and the importance of getting those deliverables right is that's normally what payment is all linked around, and also the success of the project. So there in front of you is the set of what we'd actually agreed with the CITB to train up 2 lean leaders, 8 lean practitioners trained to actually give a basically overview, what we call lean touch, light touch overview to 100 members of the staff and of our supply chain, achieve the accreditation, and also to produce various training materials and a case study. One of the things that we saw was key and was helped with the key to the success of the project in terms of the transformation project within the business was to make sure you've got the right resources, and certainly a recommendation that I would make is to make sure that they're in place if anybody's considering the adoption of the ISO and lean transformation. We engaged an external lean expert, which was Steve. We also took some advice and brought on board Professor Tony Bendell as well, with his experience from a sort of audit side and also from the RSS, Royal Statistical Society, which is part of, say, the committee that authored the standard. We seconded over one of our own project managers as an internal resource to actually manage the project through itself, and that individual was very key to the success of the project, having the capacity to drive it forward alongside everybody's day job, which is probably one of the normal resistors to change. We've engaged our own internal audit and management system consultant and also then obviously considerable internal staff time as well for training and completing of portfolios. What we actually achieved was we surpassed the targets that were set by the CITB. We managed to actually get 4 lean leaders, including myself and the rest of the senior management team. My three number 2s were all trained up to become lean leaders. We managed 6 lean practitioners, and we also created a new level in terms of lean implementers, which isn't actually in the standard. We felt it was appropriate for those that are engaged in some of the lean activities that wouldn't necessarily be trained up to a lean practitioner standard, to give them some sort of recognition and certification for their involvement. And along with Steve, we managed to deliver this lean implementer level as well. We were successful in rolling out across every member of staff within Gilbert and Good, and also with a number of our supply chain as well were also included. And off the back of that as well, we've set up a number within the business. We've put the architecture in place to actually manage the delivery of the ISO standard and our lean management system, with a lean management team and a number of KPIs and associated forums. In terms of how we went about implementing or defining our lean management system, as with any sort of lean process, we had to take it right back to our overall corporate and company strategy, and that's a key starting point for any system that you want to implement. You want to make sure that it's delivering what the business needs to deliver, but then we looked at how we wanted to deliver it, and then how best to improve that delivery by setting a number of long-term targets, and also then some short-term targets which were aligned to those in terms of what the business needed to deliver. We then set about gathering data, and this is something I was speaking to Steve earlier about. Getting that benchmark data is an important starting point, but if you haven't got necessarily the right information in terms of baseline, as you evolve and get more mature around your data recording, there's always the opportunity to that and look for improvements, but it's actually getting the baseline to start with, against which you can set targets, then analyze improvement opportunities, implement improvement projects, then actually assess what the improvement in performance has been, and then basically act accordingly and go around that cycle again. So on your screen now is the list of KPIs that the company have put together, that we track on a monthly basis through our lean management forums, and we've introduced a business improvement cycle where actually we take that KPI data, and we've had an improvement forum for each of the KPI metrics. On a monthly basis, they will review all the new data, look at where we're performing against the targets. There will then be if there's any variance in terms of performance, whether it's positive or negative, we use various statistical analysis tools, particularly Pareto analysis, but others as well, to actually to drill down into that data, to truly understand why we're getting the results that we're getting, and then learning from that, and off the back of that, putting in improvement projects to deal with those issues. Those improvement projects are then deployed in the business through the lean practitioners and the lean implementers, and then they will go around the cycle. We review the data, look at the performance, review it within the lean management team, the business improvement team, and then that will go back around the cycle. One of the key things that in the business that we've learned, and I think is fundamental with any sort of lean continuous improvement process, is getting those people involved. They're actually the people that are delivering it is the key way to get the best value and to ensure success. I mentioned on the previous slide about those lean improvement projects. What we've set up is what's referred to as the single page plan. We've got a lot of project track, and what we need to do is make sure that those projects themselves support the overall corporate objective, and then the lower level targets set within those corporate objectives. So for each lean improvement project, we've got a plan to say where they fit and where they contribute to delivering the overall performance targets. So at the bottom of the screen, you've got some of the areas in terms of the targets we're trying to achieve, and the elements of the projects that can actually contribute towards those targets are actually listed. So we can build up rather than just going into it blind, hoping that individual projects might deliver some output at the end to contribute to a target, we can actually have a clear plan of how we're going to achieve the targets that the business have set. And on the right hand side, it's just a little pie chart to say what progress we've made on those individual improvement projects. We actually have come up with more improvement projects than we can actually cope with at any one time. So it's a case of prioritising, optimising which projects you're going to take through with the capacity of staff doing this, majority of staff doing it alongside their day job. So it's important that you queue projects, improvement projects if necessary, and prioritise those that are going to give the most impact or the most value to the business. Clearly, training and communication is fundamental to the success of any change management project, any transformation project within a business, and doing that, particularly with the supply chain as well, in a collaborative way and bringing all staff on board has been, again, fundamental to the success of what we've done. One of the things that I would say, and the picture you've now got up on your screen may look a little bit confusing, and I will explain what it is. It's a screenshot of the competency matrix, which is actually in the ISO standard, and it's there. The one you've got is a copy of the Lean Leader one. From my perspective, and as a company, we've got ISO 9001, 14001, and 18001. So we've got the QA, we've got the environmental, and we've got the health and safety. And the one thing for me that 18404 sits apart from those other three standards is the emphasis that it puts on the competencies of the people within the business that are there to deliver the lean systems and processes. And it's very explicit. It is fairly onerous, but in terms of what it actually achieves, I think it's critical to the success, or certainly it has been within our business. Within the standard, there are 18 competencies. There's competencies set in the standard for a lean expert, a lean leader, and a lean practitioner. As I said myself, I did the lean leader training and competency. So there's 18 competencies that I had to fulfill. Against each one of those competencies, there's 3 levels. One of which is a general sort of understanding and implementing. The second one is managing, and the third one is training. For lean leader, you have to complete certainly the first 2 areas of implementing and managing. And also there's certain elements that you have to complete the training for as part of the lean leader. You have to put this evidence portfolio together as part of your assessment as becoming a lean leader, whatever level that you want to achieve, and that is independently assessed, your portfolio evidence followed by an interview, and also it includes a 3-hour stats exam from the RSS as well to make sure that you can deliver what you're talking about in terms of the numbers. So it is quite onerous. The other thing that it did force you to do as well is that in order to tick the box of training, you've got to physically deliver all of this stuff. And what it meant is, in order for myself and my senior management team to achieve the certification as lean leaders, we had to train personally all staff within the company. And I think it was the fact that we as leaders were seen at the front, leading on the training members of our staff, which I think is, again, plays part of the critical success to achieving the ISO standard. And again, it's just a simplified view of the competency matrix and what we had to achieve. Picking up on lean transformation, and I mentioned earlier about getting the buy-in and the leading from the front. It's all about creating a continuous improvement culture within the business. Like any change program, it goes through what's obviously the Kubler-Ross change curve is the one that's often quoted. But within any business, there's always that sort of different stages of change that both individuals and companies go through. But it's all about leadership in order to make that happen. One of the key things, and I think the success, particularly working with Steve, is that quite often when people refer to lean, particularly the ISO standard, they will think initially of manufacturing. The way Steve has led training within the business, and we have shared in that, is to actually make everything very relevant to construction. Clearly, there's a few examples that you may use in the history side of lean. Some of that will come from manufacturing, but it's to make it very relevant to what the individuals within the company are doing, to the job that they're doing, and making sure ultimately that it adds value and has an impact in terms of the investment in time that people are making into, and the subsequent improvement that it will deliver. In terms of the timeline and how long it took us to get to the certification under the ISO new ISO standard, overall it was about 18 months. There was a probably 6-month preliminary period where we were talking to CITB, scoping things out. But then when we actually commenced it, did all the training, did all the various certifications for practitioners and also for lean leaders, and then the ISO certification itself, which was done independently by BSI. The actual implementation phase was around about a year for the project. I'm just kind of summarising the learning for those that are considering going through either lean transformation or for the ISO standard as well. Clearly, it's about leadership. Leading from the front, I think, it's got to be is key to the success. Very soon involving all the team and all the members of the business, and also collaborating very much with your supply chain, because if you're heavily reliant on your supply chain for delivery, they're obviously got to be a key part of any success. Getting the right level of support, substantial support that was required for the ISO standard, and also the right level of expert guidance in different areas. It's about changing or challenging existing methods or thinking, and it's also about changing the culture of the business. Next one I put there is about data. It's about the importance of measuring things, and if you can't measure it, then you don't know whether you're improving it. But there is also a bit of a data journey, and as the data gets more mature and you get more adverse or used to gathering the data, then you can then start to evolve the data you're looking at, and also how you break that down. Certainly you won't get it right all the time. The key thing is, and certainly is making sure that you sustain it within the business. I would say the last 18 months for our company has been very much about putting the systems in place, although they're all up and running. There's been a fair bit of focus in actually getting all the training completed, all the individuals certified and the companies certified. And now really we're at the point where we can deliver the real value to the business by driving out that waste and creating the efficiencies. And with those sort of learning points in mind, it was really just to flag up that both myself and Steve will be at the IGLC conference in July, picking up a number of the aspects of our learning from going through being the first company, not only construction company, but the first company from any sector in the world to actually achieve this ISO accreditation. And we can cover it in more depth at the IGLC conference in July. So thank you very much, everybody. That's my part, and Steve's completed his, so we're now available to answer any questions.
Thank you. I'd like to thank both Steve and Simon for their insightful presentation. We'll now move on to the Q&A. We have several questions in already, so whichever wants to take the first one, we can work away. Why use ISO 18404 rather than some other certification scheme?
Okay, I'll take that if I may. Well, one of the key reasons is because it's an ISO, it has global reach. So there are other certification schemes, and I think one of the current problems we're facing with adoption of the ISO is a little bit of not invented here syndrome, where everyone's trying to promote their own scheme. So the beauty of the ISO is it's global. ISO is actually a charity. It's a not-for-profit, and I think we should just get behind it and get on with it. I hope that picks that one up, Susan.
Great, thank you. Simon?
Just from my perspective as well, the ISO standard is fairly challenging, and I don't think when it was created, there's probably an acknowledgement of that, and certainly if you get it, you've earned your stripes, and it kind of challenges you to do things in terms of, I mentioned earlier about the level of training, the requirement that is put on the lean leaders. There are a lot of things stages that you could probably skip if you weren't following the ISO standard. I don't think you get the real value from it. Sometimes you've got to push yourself, and the standard does push you to do things, and ultimately then you deliver the value off the back of it.
Okay, great. We have another question in asking, where is the best place for lean training?
That's a good one. Okay, in terms of lots of places you can go for lean training, in terms of lean training that will not only match the ISO, but also be approved under the standard, not many at the moment. I mean, we will be able to offer this through WSP. That will be matching the standard, and one of the reasons I recently joined WSP is we've got global reach again that can really help get a hold of this. But any training organisation that can prove that they have courses that match the competencies in the standard and can prove that they have competent trainers and they're not a kind of a here today, gone tomorrow company, can apply for approval by the Royal Statistical Society to have their courses approved. So at the moment, the RSS is the custodian and the policeman of the standard. So at the moment, there's not many, but any trainers out there who'd like to go through the mill of getting their stuff accredited can.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Another question, how do we get individuals certified as lean practitioners under the scheme?
Yeah, okay. So yeah, they basically have to demonstrate that they are competent against the requirements in the standard. So there are annexes in the ISO standard, specifically in table B1, that describe what a lean practitioner should be able to understand and apply in terms of lean competencies. So it's basically a system whereby the person would assemble a portfolio of evidence, and once they've got through a portfolio of evidence that matches the standard, they would submit that to an approved assessor, which will be either RSS or one of their approved assessors under the scheme. And they will check the portfolio and see if it matches the standard. And then the candidate will then need to sit a written exam and given a presentation, that's an interview, and be prepared to defend their portfolio in front of assessors. So it's quite rigorous. If it's a genuine lean practitioner, it's not actually that hard, as long as it's a genuine person and it's not kind of what I was talking about earlier, where someone's been on a half-day training course. There's someone's a genuine lean practitioner, and they're regularly applying improvements in their workplace. It shouldn't be too onerous.
Just one thing to add on that is around the sustainment, and the point I made about the differential between 18404 and some of the other ISO standards and the requirement on the competencies of the individuals. When the company gets certified for the ISO standard, the portfolios and the training of the individuals will also get audited by BSI, whoever's doing the audit. And the importance is that portfolio of evidence is actually kept up to date, and nothing's more than 2 years out of date. So even when you've got the certification as a practitioner, the company's got the certification, you are effectively forced, in inverted commas, to keep that momentum going by keeping that portfolio of evidence alive. So in some respects, you've got a catalyst for sustainment within the business, but you've got to keep that portfolio live, which means you've got to keep the continuous improvement work going within the business to actually maintain your status as a lean practitioner or a lean leader, and also maintain your company accreditation.
Okay, great, thank you. We've lots of questions coming in now. With a question, best example of how you sell the lean idea to the team?
I'll give that one to you, so.
Well, I think as I said, it's about leadership, demonstrating that you are truly committed, that it's not just another clever idea the MD's come up with because he hasn't got anything else to do. The fact that you've experienced some of it yourself, you can see the value, and then you actually go with the business. You demonstrate through leadership that you are fully committed to it. I think is the key in terms of successfully bringing people on board. But it's also then how you communicate with people. I mentioned before about the language that you speak. You can start talking about lean, and people switch off because they don't think it's relevant to construction. But it's about demonstrating from an early stage that it is relevant. Quite often, and I think from my perspective, the biggest beauty and the biggest win around lean is that most of the real successful tools are very simple, common sense things, whether it's things like last planner, whether it's visual management stuff. Sometimes the easiest stuff, the quickest win stuff is the best stuff. You can start to people hooks on that and actually see, just a little waste walk, bit of visual management, things start to get better, then I think you quickly start to convert people and they will start to join you on the lean journey. And I think that's the way I would say approach it.
Okay, perfect. Another couple of questions in one here. Was it possible to do the benchmarking? Did you find any company who wanted to join this process?
In terms of the benchmarking for Gilbert and Good, it's effectively their own internal benchmarking, because obviously we're looking at our historic performance, setting targets against historic performance, and then looking to then improve on that. But then obviously some of the lean projects, some of the improvement projects we were doing, we're not, we don't have all the ideas ourselves, so we'll be looking outside externally for other bits of best practice that we can bring in to help us improve our systems. But say the baseline benchmarking was internal information. Sometimes one of the challenges is the quality of historic information that you've got within a business, and certainly the more we've focused on reviewing data on a monthly basis, we have now got much better quality data in the business, which means now as we now move on, we can refine our targets and they become much more meaningful in relation to the business.
I'll just chip in on the subject of benchmarking. The best people to benchmark against are yourselves, your own business. If you benchmark yourself against another business, you find out that they are better than you are at something. It might not help too much because you won't understand probably why they're better. If you find out you're better than them, that can make you complacent, so you don't worry about improving. So the whole point of measurement is to be able to see the impact of any improvements made and see if things are actually getting better or worse. So benchmarking against yourself is probably the best answer anyway.
Okay, another question from an attendee. If the heart of lean is lean thinking, is it not a risk to standardize the approach and cause a fixed mindset?
I'm not quite sure I understand that question. I would argue that standardization is at the heart of lean, and we can see that going way back into lean history, going back into TWI, and that was adopted by Toyota and many others. The standard isn't prescriptive in terms of specifically how you do things and what tools you use. So, for example, one of the criteria might talk about managing productive time, and one company might have a technique or tool that manages productive time very differently to another. And if you can prove that the way you do it works, that's fine. So it's not so prescriptive as to tie you down in knots so you can't move. Also, the whole point of standardized work as a philosophy is to first stabilize the process so that the process becomes capable of being improved. So without a standard, actually there's no stability, and the process is almost impossible to improve. So what it allows to do over time is improve these lean systems and improve the ISO over time. I don't know what iteration of 9001 we're on, but you probably know more about that. Is it 4 or 5? My ISO 9001 is different now to when it first came out. It's been improved, and I expect the same to happen with the 18404.
And as Steve said, it basically relies on you having that. We've got an integrated management system now which picks up all the ISO standards. But as with any standard, it's based around how you operate within your business, and therefore you have that flexibility. As long as you're consistent on how you apply it within your own business, and you hit certain criteria within the standard, then you do have a fair degree of flexibility.
Okay, perfect. Simon briefly mentioned it earlier, but the question has been asked to both of you. Would you be able to give a brief overview of what you'll be talking about at the IGLC conference this year?
Okay, so I'm not actually speaking, but I'll be at the, I may be speaking, it's not quite true. So I'll be attending the industry day, and I'll be taking part as one of the members of the expert panel. Now, the theme of that day is leadership. Now, as a hands-on leader, the first MD globally to have led this from the front, Simon's going to be presenting specifically on the subject of leadership. It may be the case that I will also be presenting later on in the conference, because I have a paper in for peer review, but it's not hasn't got through the peer review process yet, so can't count my chickens there. But it should be a great event, and it's great to actually have a whole day dedicated to leadership in construction, because actually that's what makes it work.
Brilliant, that's great. Another question: to improve information flow process during design phase, what tools do you recommend, combining lean tools and BIM functionalities?
Okay, so that would be Ben, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think it was one of the areas. One of our KPI metrics was the sort of pre-construction timescales and how to improve those. And we've used various sort of tools such as Last Planner. Quite often, Last Planner is associated with the delivery and the on-site. I actually think it's as valid, if not more valid, in the design phase, where perhaps the deliverables are slightly less tangible, where the interrelationships between all of the various different design disciplines, whilst on site, you can physically see what those interfaces are. Designers perhaps aren't quite so explicit. So I think applying those sorts of tools to try and get the design teams working more collaboratively, I think has been one of the, actually, of all the various metrics, the one that we've achieved most improvement on is that sort of pre-construction planning and design stages. We've also set ourselves various targets. A lot of the perhaps pre-construction stage can be third parties' involvement, such as things like getting planning. There's elements which you are in charge of and have control over, and it's about maximising the output within those areas. And I think the lean systems in that pre-construction is key. The other element of lean within pre-construction is looking at things like DFMA, looking at how you're actually going to deliver when you can go off-site, and actually building that philosophy into the initial design stages, because that may affect things as simple as the overall sort of massing of buildings. Early sort of planning kind of conditions may be affected by the route that you actually choose to deliver, and getting that thinking into early stage planning and design, I think again is key from a lean perspective.
So I'll just chip in with a little bit more there. Thanks, Simon. One of the lean leaders, Ben Fellows, it actually heads up that department within Gilbert and Good. So at a very senior level, we were driving that end of the business, and yeah, there's a lot going on in terms of last planner and visual management, and generally applying the concepts of value and waste to the pre-start process.
Okay, great. Someone is asking, what is the most difficult gap to bridge with the process?
That's a good one.
I think in terms of the standard, there's a lot of criteria that you have to get in terms of the competencies. So I don't think anything is specifically difficult. The challenge was the volume of what you need to get through. And I think for the business, it's doing it alongside what people see as the day job, and it's actually finding time to do improvement work. And I think that's the biggest challenge, and that's all about the culture, bringing people with you, and actually for them to understand the value and the impact on the business. So the biggest challenge, maybe not gap, is the people, because ultimately they'll determine the success of what you're doing.
Sure. Okay. Somebody else is asking, did ISO 18404 overlap in some degree with ISO 9001 as QA is part of lean system?
Yes, it does. So, for example, within ISO 9001, there's an absolutely specific requirement to measure customer satisfaction. Within the 18404, there's a specific requirement to show how you're improving your KPIs that are linked to your strategy. So therefore, it makes great sense to have customer satisfaction as one of your key KPIs. Also, in ISO speak, the way that the 18404 is assessed is regarded as what is termed as normative to 9001. So it is closely linked.
Okay. I think we're running out of time now. We've had a lot of questions. So once again, I'd like to thank Steve and Simon for their presentation and obviously answering all the questions. A copy of this webinar will be sent out to everyone who attended. The next webinar will take place on Wednesday, the 24th of April, and we will send out the information shortly via LinkedIn, Twitter, and newsletter. Thank you again from Steve, Simon, and myself on behalf of Lean Construction Ireland. You can follow Lean Construction Ireland on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and through the website leanconstructionireland.ie. Enjoy the rest of your day and be lean.